This is the Christmas Movie Screenwriter Podcast, episode number 32. Hello and welcome to the Christmas Movie Screenwriter Podcast. I'm your host, Karen McCann. The Christmas Movie Screenwriter is a podcast about writing, producing, and selling Christmas movies. You can find a transcript, show notes, and an action checklist on my website. Just go to christmasmoviescreenwriter.com and look for this episode, which is number 32. A quick few words about what I'm working on. I am now writing a short story, or perhaps a novella, as a reader magnet for my website. This is for my debut novel. I'm also almost done with my author website, and I wrote a plan for my book series. So lots of writing ahead. Now, in this episode, it's a little different. Instead of talking about Christmas movies, my guest, a producer with 100 credits, Robin Weiner of Synergy Cinema, we discuss industry realities and trends and career strategies for writers. Here is that interview. Robin is an award-winning producer with over 100 credits and a career that has spanned nearly 30 years. She is also a sought-after line producer and production manager based in Vancouver and works regularly on TV movies for Lifetime, Hallmark, and Great American Family Networks, where she has served as producer, line producer, production manager, and supervising producer. She is also recognized for her keen budgeting skills, preparing budgets for development, production, and financing purposes. Robin's other professional accomplishments include serving as a past president for Gender Equity in Media, GEMS, formerly WIF TV, where she was awarded the Wayne Black Service Award for her behind-the-scenes contributions. Well, Robin, thank you for coming on the Christmas Movie Screenwriter Podcast today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Now, you've done a lot of Christmas movies before, but today's interview is a little different. Instead of talking about Christmas movies directly, I think we're going to use this more of a strategy session for writers, and we'll discuss, for example, industry realities, career strategies for writers, marketing strategy, and of course, the producer's perspective. So why don't we start with industry realities? Now, studios are cutting budgets. What does that mean for writers? Are indie projects still viable?
I think indie projects are probably more viable now than they ever have been for that particular reason. The studios are cutting back on things. But if you even look at the films that are even nominated this year, and I kind of went through them before this interview because I wanted to see sort of what those budget ranges were. We used to have these massive tentpole movies that were up for Academy Awards in the last, say, 10 to 20 years. And if you look at even what's out there, and I sort of did a bit of a countdown, Anora, Academy nominated for Best Film, $6 million. You had Nickel Boys, 23, Brutalist, 10, Amelia Perez, 23, I'm Still Here, 1.5, The Substance, 17.5. And aside from Dune and Wicked, which were definitely higher budgeted films, even A Complete Unknown was 60 to 70. These are still, most of those films are definitely in the under $25 million range, which that is still considered more of an indie film. And it's more independent. It's not a massive studio film. And even Sing Sing, I kind of read about how they did the financing on that film, and it was a very different model. So I think that unless you're able to break into a studio picture and you've got contacts to get your film in there and you're making like a tentpole movie, then yes, I think that indie films are definitely going to be very viable, and even more so. I think studios will probably try and chop up their budgets a little bit more to create smaller films, so they have more out there, more to stream. That's what I'm hearing, and that's what I'm seeing too. So
yeah, that's good news. Okay. Yeah. Now, how have streamers changed what gets made, and what genres do you think are selling now?
Well, there seems to be, when streamers, when TV first came out, even movie stars snub their nose at doing anything that was a anything that was on a small box. And now a small box is anything from your phone to your iPad to your television. And so that shift, even in the last 15 years is dramatic the way actors have seen content. And that there's people, even during the pandemic, I'm sure you remember, people had gobbled up so much content and production was down for so many months. We saw that people wanted content. We saw that people wanted entertainment. But with the industry shifting over the last couple of years, I think that budgets have definitely gotten smaller. They're not making as many big budget shows. They're looking for things that they can shoot in varying locations that may have better tax incentives. And also films, unfortunately, there's a lot of reality too. But I do see that the shift in making more series and things that are financially more accessible for studios and for production companies is more the shift. Even the traditional Hallmark movie per se, you have Netflix putting out their Christmas movies that are not Hallmark movies, but they seem to be doing very well. And those are still done in the, definitely under $10 million range for sure, like well below that. So yeah, that's what I see happening with streamers.
And any idea about what genres might be hot right now?
I mean, romantic comedies will always, always sell. And one of the reasons they sell is because you can play a romantic comedy in almost any language. And even if the sound is off, you know what's going on. If you take China, for example, they don't have a rating system. So, you can take your 10-year-old to the movie theater and you can take your grandmother and there isn't a rating system for PG or R-rated movies. And romantic comedies do very well there. And you can watch it on TV and you still know what the storyline is going to be. And I think that romantic comedies do well because people still also like light and hope that will still remain, a genre that will happen, and that will always do well. I think that thrillers are, still a genre that sells, and horror for sure. That horror never seems to go out of style. I think that that's sort of the opposite end of like a romance, but it's, emotionally you're still investing in what's happening at the end of that film. But they're harder to sell for all territories, right? Not all countries will buy horror films, right? So, yeah, that's what I see. I mean, the content that and you can just turn on your Netflix. And it also seems like we're seeing more, I don't really want to say apocalyptic type of shows, but if you look at even TV series like Silo, which deals with like what happens in the future, like where is our world, or the TV series Severance. There seems to be, I've seen more shows of like the what if kind, and those are bigger to make, but that seems to be another genre that seems to be more prevalent. And comedies always, if they're good, like you get a show like Hacks, it's, and you get stars behind that, then I think those will do well too.
Now, diversity seems to sell. Why is that? Is that about representation or global appeal or perhaps financial returns?
I was thinking about this question earlier, and diversity, it's not so much, diversity should also be about inclusion and representation. And I think if writers are writing diverse, inclusive, representational content to just write it, they're not authentic. Years ago, we would see movies and films that we look at today and we shudder, and they tried to be quote unquote diverse, but it was a bunch of white people writing diverse content. And so if you are a writer and you have a story that you want to tell, say about an Indigenous person's life, you read a book, you think it's great, you should not tell that story on your own.
Right.
You could maybe partner with a writer. Um, it's important that representation is there because people want to see themselves represented on screen. They want to see their stories told. We live in a diverse world. And so if we only see stories from one lens, it's, you know, I don't want to see that, and I'm a Caucasian person. I want to see the world represented, but I also want to see it represented authentically. I just saw the
Right.
film last night, One of Them Days. And, it's about two young Black women living kind of in the projects in LA and just trying to make a better life. But that entire movie, except for a couple of cast, was all Black cast. The director is Black. Like the story is what I felt was likely a very authentically told
Mm.
story from a perspective that I don't have. But if I tried to write that story, not only would I be called out, and I should be called out for that story, but I think it's important that you're including the voices of those stories, right? So don't tell an Indigenous person's story without a lot of research, but also
Mm.
partner with somebody who can lend that perspective and lens to that story in an authentic way. That to me, I think is most important, and then you get community behind you. You have viewers that want to see a film. You look at Amelia
Right.
Perez, for instance, and it is being criticized for the director not representing, you know, Mexican, culture and people the way
Mm.
they see themselves, right? And that I think is a
Mm.
fail if it's not being done in a truly authentic way. So yeah,
Right. So there's a
inclusion.
financial incentive to be authentic.
Yes, I'd say the financial incentive comes from, like, for sure. Like in Canada, for instance, we have a funding body, Telefilm, and they support filmmakers. And diversity is definitely very, very high on their list. But if I brought them a story, an Indigenous story, for instance, and the writer was a Caucasian writer, they're not going to fund that film
Oh, okay.
because you are going to get a lot of feedback, a lot of criticism from, and you should,
Yes. Yes.
from the Indigenous community saying, why is a white person telling our story? But
Right.
and we also want to raise the voices of those people in diverse communities so that their stories are being told. Now, if I bring them a writer who is Indigenous and the director is Indigenous and I've got a lead and all of those things, now I'm actually telling an authentically diverse story. So, yes, it
Right.
can affect your funding, it can affect who you get for talent. And, and I also think you should make a story that you're passionate about. And if you do have such a story, find a way to tell it in the best authentic way so that the people who you're trying to tell that story for and honor also feel that.
Right.
That I think is extremely important.
Exactly. Well, let's
Yeah.
talk a minute about career strategies for writers. Have you seen writers get stuck in a niche and how can they avoid it?
I don't know that I've personally seen writers get stuck in a niche. I mean, I've worked in the past on a number of Hallmark movies, and there are writers who have made an excellent career at writing that genre. And as simple as people think those stories are, they're actually difficult to write because they have to hit exactly the right beats, have exactly the right tone. And as even Hallmark's lens has shifted and they're telling stories that are more diverse, you know,
Right.
telling those stories, even the mystery movies that they did, I've worked with writers who that was their that was their specialty and they just sort of know the recipe of how to write, the first act and how you get into the second one and how you're going to end the show. So I don't know that having a niche is necessarily a bad thing, especially if you really hone that particular skill set and you're really good at telling those stories. I think that that's fine. And I think a writer would just have to ask themselves, what are the stories I want to tell? I don't, I haven't really worried necessarily about my choices. Like if there were stories I was okay telling, I'll produce those stories. You know, I'm making content I still want to make, but and a writer should still write the stories that they want to write. And if they try to force themselves into writing something that they don't know, maybe that's not the right avenue for them. So writing just for writing's sake, I'm not sure if that's the right strategy, or if you really want to be successful in a certain genre, then I'd say focus on that genre and do really, really well at it and become known for that. There's a ton of writers who write both series and and even composers. You look at like John Williams' career, you know instantly when you hear a John Williams score without even seeing his name in the credits, you know exactly who that is, right? So I don't, and even directors, they have a certain style that they are very,
Right.
you know, excellent at, and that's what they do, right? So I don't think it's a bad thing to have a niche per se, and if it works for you and you're selling that content, then I would say keep doing it. But if you want to transition into a different genre, then you'll have to find the people that champion that work for you too. I think.
That sort of leads into my next question, which is what's the best way for writers to shift genres? Is it a full rebrand or can it be gradual?
It's an interesting question. I mean, if a writer has built, say, a relationship with a studio, that might be a place to start. So if they've written, say, a number of romantic comedies, and then maybe they're shifting in from romantic comedies to more of these lighter, say, mystery movies, right? That some of the networks have that are still on the light fare side, but they're still on the mystery side. Then maybe they go from that. I think it can be challenging to go from, say, that content to then be seen in a completely uh, indie, like I'm going to write a horror movie now. But, you know, I have great ideas, but I am not a writer per se. So I don't know a writer's process in terms of what they feel. And I think most writing comes from, you know, inside. Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And what are you passionate about? So I think if you're a good writer, you're going to be a good writer in a different genre, but also understanding that genre too, right? There's a formula to horror movies, there's a formula to thrillers. So the more you watch, the more you read, and I think if a writer wants to shift to that, then maybe start even watching and reading scripts that are successful in that particular genre. You know, what are people buying? What are they looking at these days, right? So I think that you can do the shift, but you'll have to get maybe other people behind you or that studio or producer you're working with that they can start championing your work as well. That would be, I would think, a way a writer could transition into doing a different genre.
Well, the other positive thing about being really good at a genre like romantic comedies or comedies or whatever genre the writer picks is that you develop a brand.
Yeah.
And that is, it's hard enough to make contacts at various studios, and some execs are doing certain genres.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to kind of spread yourself so thin that you're trying to market to everyone, and in the end, you get to no one.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that too. And I think if you've got something that works and you're happy working in that genre, but as I said, there's been a lot of studios who've done, like Hallmark's one of them, where they've done the romantic comedy uh, MOWs, and they've also got their TV series and their thriller series. And
Right.
often they've had writers that have been able to do both of those. You know, there's still a little bit of the the romance side within those. But there's a lot of successful writers. And I think writers can even look up the genres they like, the shows they like, and see what some of really successful writers have they transitioned into, different things. Like, I think it really depends. You've got a writer, you know, that may start off in one genre and shift into a slightly different one where everyone goes, wow, that's completely different. Uh, and if they're good, it's then they're going to be good, I think, in both genres, right?
Right. Well, let's talk a second about, yeah, all right. Let's talk a minute about production and market strategy. Should writers set stories in tax-friendly locations? How much do incentives matter?
I think that's a funny question because whenever I read a script, sometimes it's a big script and it doesn't seem like it might be doable, under a certain budget level. But I still support a writer writing what they want to write, like what they want to put on the page. They shouldn't worry about budgets. I think that that's the job of a producer. That's the job of a studio. I wouldn't worry about tax credits. Like any good producer will read a script and it might say downtown Manhattan, and you've got a Vancouver-based producer. We know how to do these things. And if we like the story, nowadays there's so much technology behind making movies, right? Whether you're going to a virtual stage and you're going to drive through the countryside, or you're going to be in downtown Manhattan, or you're going to be, in Tokyo, you can do a lot of these things without necessarily being in those places. And tax credits, a writer should not be concerned about tax credits at all. That's up to a producer and a studio as to where they're going to shoot those movies. So no, I would not tell a writer to limit their muscles by what is going to be made in the end. As I said, we read these scripts all the time. There may be 30 locations because a writer in their mind is envisioning all of these things, and we'll read that and say, well, it doesn't have to be in the barn, or that can be over here. Like, we are smart enough people, and the studios are smart enough to be able to figure out where we can place these locations that a writer has put in. We have that creativity. So I think writers should just write exactly what they want to write and let us figure out where we can make that move.
Well, my next question was going to be, now you already mentioned that writers don't need to worry about budgets or tax incentives, but do you think lower cost scripts get made more often?
Yes. If you look at what has been out there in the past couple of years, right? Like a movie like Wicked is a massively expensive movie to make, right? But how many movies like Wicked are out there? That's what, $165 million. Nobody's really writing, and if you have writers on this podcast that have $165 million scripts, they're probably not listening to this podcast. And in all due respect, they are working on scripts and they're connected to studios. But I think, I don't know writers that are writing massive scripts that are going to be in that massive, $100 million range.
Right.
I think the average writer is trying to write a decent story that is connecting with people. They're not writing huge special effects, big movies. So yes, I think, keeping lower budget content is definitely easier to produce, especially with even the big studios. The money, as you can see, has shifted. Laid off employees. There's a shift in how we're viewing content. There's a shift in what's being made. So yes, I think if you are writing a historical drama that is massive, unless you have a close relationship with a studio or an agent or a producer director who can get said movie made, there's just less money available these days to make those massive kinds of movies. So making things, as I said, all these movies I mentioned earlier, the Academy nominated films for 2025, are most of them under 25 million. I was actually surprised that even a movie like Conclave, and again, who knows if this is all above the line and below the line budget, but Conclave was made for 20 million. I mean, that to me is,
Really?
that's what, that's
Amazing.
what it says on. If that's true, I don't know if that includes all of the above line talent. Oftentimes, these budgets where they say the movie is made for so much money doesn't always include the above the line talent. So, but
Okay.
even if it was still made for 20, it was still a sizable film with, some
Yeah.
sizable actors. So again, smaller film, not in like 20 million, is not considered a huge budget film from a movie perspective.
Right.
Going, in the 50, 60, $100 million range. These are big movies, but 20 and under. But again, 20 can be a harder range to make, making something sometimes 5 and under, 10 and under. Those are sometimes easier movies to get made. And stars now are often attaching themselves to really, really good projects, right? If like Adrian Brody came on the Brutalist, and that film was just under $10 million, right?
Mhm.
And I think he took a massive pay cut from what I've read to do that film. And again, the story was such an incredible story that,
Hmm.
I don't think it was about money. We're talking about getting a story out there that people wanted to see. So
Well, that leads into my next question, which is we're going to talk about the producer's perspective. What makes a script stand out? And you were just talking about an A-list actor who probably took a pay cut for the script. So what would make a script stand out?
I think that when you look at the number of stories that are actually out there, there's only a handful, right? Save the Cat kind of mentions that. So whether you're writing a thriller or you're writing a romantic comedy or a horror movie or a buddy comedy or a fish out of water story or whatever that genre is, it has been told before. It's not going to be new. So what a good writer needs to do is, how do you tell that story so differently that has never really been done before, that gets people's attention? And that is a difficult thing to do. If you take a movie like The Substance, for instance, now we've seen many movies that talk about the female perspective and on aging and what
Hmm.
happens to a woman. And if you took all of the horror elements out of The Substance, it would not be the movie that people would have clamored to the movie theaters to see. But
Right.
that film was done in such a unique perspective, in such a unique storytelling way, that we had never really seen done before. And that's why that film
Yeah.
works, right? And that's why you have somebody like Demi Moore jumping on board that film. You look at a film like The Last Showgirl. I was really moved by that film. It was made for a couple $1 million, and Pamela Anderson's agent actually passed on the script. She had actually fired her agent for not passing the script off to her. It was her son who found out about the movie. And again, a unique perspective, right? And she was super interested in being a part of that movie. So I think that you've just got to tell a story that isn't the same old cookie cut movie. If you're trying to break out from what isn't already formulaic. And,
Right.
years ago when I was in university, I remember, I'll never forget this, 20th century literature professor said that every year, and I don't know if this is still true today because this is going back several years ago, but every year, Harlequin Romances used to run a contest. And the contest was to pitch an idea for a book. And he said it's actually one of the most difficult books to write. And I thought, oh, come on, how could Harlequin Romances be hard? Because they're the same story, and they've told
Right.
thousands of the same story over and over and over again, but it's a different, fresh perspective every single time. So if you take that to the genres that we watch. Like, why was Parasite such an incredible movie? Because that story was told in a completely different way that no one had seen before, right? And that is what I think stands out in a script where we know we're seeing a buddy comedy. We know we're watching a romantic comedy. I know I've opened someone's script and it's a thriller, but wow, this is kind of different. This is unique. So not playing into the same tropes that exist, but still doing the same things, but in a completely different way. Like everybody can make a salad, but what are you adding to your salad that makes it stand out on that menu? What is unique about your story that hasn't quite been told before, or is a lens that's different? And that's like, I watched the movie Sing Sing the other day, and I thought I was going to see a completely different movie than what I saw. And I loved how they told this story. I was totally moved by it. Like, and even how they started the film, how they ended the film, the perspective they took. I was not expecting it at all. And, as a result, it was a great, great film. Right. So yeah, having a different lens, and also making sure you don't write in director notes. That is like a fail-safe way of just not having your script. Like, don't tell me how you're placing the camera or a low
Oh,
angle shot.
wow.
Yeah, these are just terrible. Like, let a director is going to read that script, the producer's going to read it. And I think the other thing that writers should also be wary of is how they are describing characters. Scripts are not just read by producers, they are sent to actors. And I personally loathe descriptive characterizations that go like this: Susan, a pretty young girl with a slim body, walks into the cafe. I loathe those descriptions because an actor is going to read that and it says nothing about who the character is at all. And you've also told the director and potential director and a producer and a potential actor your perspective that this actor now has to be pretty, which is, what does that even mean?
And skinny.
Yeah. But if you said something like, Susan walks into the room with a purposeful walk, she's the kind of girl that everyone notices as soon as she enters the room. She sits down and everyone takes notice. Something like that says
Right.
who that character is more. So I love when writers write stuff that is
Yeah.
characterization as opposed to physical descriptions. Physical descriptions say nothing. And they are also, to me, a very tell of a junior writer that
Oh,
writes stuff.
what
Yeah.
about when a writer puts clothes on? Like you want the reader to focus on where you're not saying close up, you're saying clothes on, and then you put, she puts the key in the lock or whatever.
Uh, yeah, I think that's okay. But I've seen stuff where it's like, you know, like an angle, a high angle shot of,
Oh,
like, there's writers write
no,
that stuff as if they are the directors. You've written the script unless you plan on directing it. And even if you do, you don't need to write it. But I love character descriptions as
right.
characters, not physical descriptions. And actors don't
That's
like
good.
that either. They want to read stuff that goes, oh, wow, this is an interesting person. And that's the other thing that I think a writer has to look at is what is going to make this script stand out, not just to a producer, but to a potential actor that's
Right.
reading that, right? And going, oh, wow, this is a character. We've all read scripts where we think the character looks really thin. It doesn't look fleshed out enough. It doesn't seem like there's enough going on. We don't know anything about them, right? We don't care about them because we don't know anything about them. There
Right.
doesn't have to be
Right.
this massive backstory, but sometimes even a descriptive line can tell you so much about somebody
Right.
um, in two sentences, and you're like, oh, I get who this person is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, if
So
you could give advice, go ahead.
I said, so kind of having meaty, meaningful descriptors in there as opposed to descriptions that are really,
Superficial.
they don't, yeah, superficial, exactly.
Yeah. If you could give advice to your younger self about producing TV movies, what would it be?
I don't know that I would give myself advice on producing TV movies because I'll be honest, it's really my passion is more on feature films and indie movies. So TV has never really been something I would say I'd give myself. I'd say if I could give myself any advice would be to I would have done producing a little bit earlier. I don't regret any of the career choices I made. They all got me to where I am today. They gave me experience and perspective that I didn't have before. So, but I think maybe I would have decided to do things a little bit earlier than I did and not waited to the point where I was like, oh, I don't want this particular career path. I want to start doing this before and being less maybe afraid of taking those steps before. But a lot of that comes down to financial decisions too. You know, you're younger and you need to make money and you need to survive. But I
Right.
have great respect for people who just went for it right off the bat. They, lived on very little and I did too for a long time as well. But I would think that's one of the things I would tell myself. And I think the other would be to be to have less ego in the game. And I think that there were a few situations in my past shows that I've produced or, when I was starting out where, the expression, you don't know what you don't know, and not knowing what I didn't know and trying to appear that I knew what I knew. Uh, I think there were times I might have been a little bit more heavy-handed with things when I should have been a little bit more open and like everybody else. So, but that's just learning, right? Now I
Yes.
think I have a better perspective of things, and now I try to come at things with a sense of I don't know the answer to that, and to realize
Yeah.
it's okay not to know something and to reach out to people who do and say, how do I do this thing? Or I'm not sure how to handle this situation. And knowing that there's always going to be people that know more than you. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. It's okay
Right.
that you are
Right.
not the smartest person in the room. Uh, yeah, and I'd say probably have started earlier in my journey. That would be, I think, the only thing.
So to wrap up, would you like to share any social media details so our audience can keep track of your work?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is at Robin Film Chick, and that's spelled Robyn and Filmchic. So it looks like film chic, but it's film chick. But either way is
Okay.
fine. I'm also on LinkedIn with my full name, Robin Weiner. And I do have a little Facebook page that is more personal, but if you want to follow some of the movie reviews that I and some of my colleagues will write, or if you want to be a part of, it's called Robin's Reviews and it's on Facebook and you can join as a member. I like everybody to contribute what they have seen and what they like or don't like. And it's a pretty open page. So you can follow me there as well. And of course on IMDb.
Excellent. Well, I'll put those all in the show notes. And well, Robin, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your experience. Thank you for coming on the Christmas Movie Screenwriter podcast today.
Thanks again. This was a real pleasure and a lot of fun to be with you, Karen. And I wish all the writers out there a lot of success with your scripts. And hopefully, I will both read and possibly even produce one of your movies these days. So, best of luck to
Oh,
everybody.
amen to that. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.
And now for my action checklist. I have 7 items for your action checklist from my interview with Robin. Number 1, pick your genre, but stay open to growth. Establish yourself in one genre to gain recognition, but don't fear branching out later. Understand the challenges of transitioning. Master one space before tackling another. Number 2, follow the streaming and indie boom. Indie films are thriving due to studio budget cuts. This could mean more opportunity for fresh voices. Know the trending genres, rom-coms, thrillers, and horror, and see where your voice fits. Number 3, be authentic and do research. Authentic representation isn't just ethical, it's a financial must in today's market. If writing about a culture outside your own, collaborate with the right people. Number 4, build your brand as a writer. Understand the storytelling formula for your genre. Producers care about marketability, but your job is to write great scripts. Don't get stuck on budgets or tax incentives. Number 5, make your story stand out in a crowded market. Unique storytelling wins, even in high budget films. Avoid overloading scripts with directorial notes. Producers and directors don't need them. And number 6, write characters that actors want to play. Focus on deep character traits rather than physical descriptions. Give actors something to sink their teeth into, not just a list of surface details. And number 7, take more risks and stay humble. The industry rewards bold, fresh voices. Don't be afraid to take chances. And always keep learning. There will always be someone who knows more than you, so reach out to them. Well, that's the show. Thank you for listening. To show your support, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can fuel more great content by buying me a hot cocoa on Buy Me a Coffee. Just look for the page Christmas Movie and explore other inspiring podcasts and blogs on our website at christmasmoviescreenwriter.com. I'm your host, Karen McCann. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next Christmas Movie Screenwriter podcast. Bye.